Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Acedo, and I am a self-help coach and motivator. And today I am joined with Rachel Caruso, and she is a natural-born shaman specializing in trauma integration. She assists humanity to move beyond. I'm sorry. Hang on. I apologize. Okay, I lost a little bit of track here. Okay. So she assists humanity to move beyond linearity and duality, as well as assisting light workers to exit the spiritual matrix. As MKULTRA survivor, she is a deprogrammer and advocate for humanity's God-given rights. As a citizen journalist, she is committed to providing in-depth disclosure to hidden factors of satanic corruption. So, very interesting background there, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here with you.
Absolutely. So it's very nice to communicate with you today. Today we're talking about MK Ultra for people who may not know what that is. It's a big topic, as well as the something that I've talked about quite a bit, which is dissociative identity disorder and how they are connected there. So if you would like to begin and have a brief background of who you are, we can begin from there.
Sure, yeah. So I am 30 years old. I'm originally from Maryland in the US, but I've been in Europe for the last 3.5 years now. And I've been in England for the last 2.5 years. And so my spiritual path is always continuously evolving and unfolding, but it is marked by, I had two profound spontaneous spiritual awakenings. One over my 25th birthday in 2014, and then the next year over Easter. And so that kind of like really unfolded my spiritual journey.
Okay, and a bit about what was that spiritual awakening that you had, and how did it impact your life so much to get you where you are today?
Well, they were profound and seemingly spontaneous awakenings, and in truth, like nothing, especially when it comes to spiritual awakenings, nothing is spontaneous because your whole life is going to be building up to it. But it's kind of like you turn a corner. So you've been taking steps, you've been walking a path all your life, and then suddenly you turn a corner. And so that's kind of what it was for me. I literally awoke from sleep one day, and on two separate occasions, and my mind was just working completely differently. I had a total different awareness. It was like I had a mind that belonged to someone else, but it felt like the true me, really.
Hmm.
So everything was just lighter, more positive, and it was my soul just coming in, and I was able to embody my soul in in totality for a couple days for each occasion, for each awakening. And so in the first awakening, it was mostly awakening to my natural light and the functions of the universe and everything. And then my second awakening, it was a little more of that, but more about what's happening with the planets, with planetary control, and also why creation has given birth to this, why we are experiencing this, and a little more about my personal purpose, my sole purpose in this life.
Awesome. And yeah, I always say that we all have our own journey and experience with our spiritual awakening. We all go at a different pace, and it's always different for someone else. So your
Yeah.
experience can be very similar and different to anyone else. So you have your own unique way of having this spiritual awakening in your life. So
Yeah.
at this point in your life, um, how are you now, and what do you teach other people?
So my journey is very interesting still, lots of waves, but I found a really centered path, just really partnered with the divine, with God, and it's it helps me to take the waves that are apparently supposed to be a part of my life, and so I share what I feel called to embody. So I actually go beyond the teaching paradigm, and I feel more aligned with sharing myself, my truths with others, really for the purpose of connection. So one soul shares their self from the heart in order for others to receive in their hearts, and there you have connection. So that's something that you could say I teach, but more so it's about just sharing rather than telling people something, portraying the message that I know something that they don't, because that's, everybody is so unique and individual. And so with that, you move beyond, it's part of moving beyond linearity and polarity, duality, which is a lot of like comparisons and just more, well, if you think about linearity, it's kind of like everything will only go in one direction, this way, or up or down. And life is a lot more expansive than that. Divinity is a lot more expansive than that. And without the linearity, you have no judgments. You just have soul essences connecting with each other, living their own purposes. And so that's a big part of what I like to share. And then it puts the power to the individual, whoever's in front of you, whoever you're connecting with. And so that we can all express ourselves, our unique selves, for no other reason than it feels good. Not to teach other people, not to say like we know the right way, not to get anywhere or achieve anything, but just to be present with each other.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a very interesting thing there that we all are unique and we're all different. So sharing these personal experiences, I know firsthand how that actually helps a lot of people. So that's very, very good. And you educate people here, and you do these personal things, and you share this on your YouTube channel that you have, as well as your Facebook. You have a Facebook page, and what are your YouTube channel is just under your name, right? And then okay,
yeah.
And then your Facebook page is Divine Recalibration, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
Divine Recalibration.
Yep. So you can certainly, all of you watching now, you can certainly check that out as well. So moving on into the main topic for today, which is a really, really big one here, DID and MKUltra. So the DID has been something that I have discussed plenty of times here. I'm sure a lot of my followers who are watching this now know that I have discussed this a decent amount. I do have certainly alternative views about this in a variety of different ways, and I talk about this in a different light than most people do. So from my perspective, and you can share your perspective as well, Rachel, this is dissociative identity disorder, which is also known as multiple personality disorder, is essentially when someone has different altered personality states that come about mostly due to childhood trauma. Someone had gone through some sort of significant childhood abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, and chronic abuse will cause an altered personality state that the person creates in their mind. And there's many different people who have a variety of different ways of expressing this. There's many people online who talk about this. I don't necessarily get behind a lot of that, mostly because it is very glamorized and glorified in a way that it seems like it's it just makes it look like it's very fun and for entertainment purposes, and it's just something that I can't really get behind because I'm mostly about focusing on the healing aspect. So, in your view, Rachel, how do you view this disorder, and what does this mean for you specifically?
Well, I'm a little bit like you in that I don't hold kind of mainstream ideas about it, and I've really explored it through my own soul perspective rather than like the clinical approach. And I agree, like the whole portraying it in a certain way that's glamorized, I think it's exploitive. It's exploitative. But for me, how I conceptualize of DID is firstly understanding dissociation in general, because a lot of people don't realize that dissociation is actually a natural part of life. So everyone dissociates. It's basically when your consciousness leaves your physical embodiments to explore other realms. And so like we do that when we read a book, if we're playing video games, or like driving on long journeys. So that's just general dissociation, and it becomes a problem whenever it it becomes a problem if it's impeding on your day-to-day function or your quality of life. And it comes about through traumatic experiences when when you couldn't handle a trauma. And so a part of your consciousness or multiple parts of your consciousness split off into, they basically leave the body and split off into other realms, exploring other realities that are easier to cope with. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's certainly a different approach than you hear most people talk about, as we said, and the whole thing about it being exploitable. And I certainly understand this. It promotes a lot of people to, and this is something that I've experienced. Promotes a lot of people who try to bring pain and suffering to that individual who is going through this by a lot of misinformation that people have about this condition, such as people calling it a fake and not real, and acting and all these different things. So it brings about that, but it also is a form of and how I see it, like you have a lot of the glamorization in movies and such that make it look a lot different than what it actually is, and they try to promote the idea that this is something that is more commonplace, that it can be something that is just a bit more for entertainment than it is for actual pain and suffering that the person has endured. And you see this with a lot of mental illness, actually. Like, there's so many I see now. It's just really, really upsetting to me personally. Like, it just a lot of times on Instagram, you will see a lot of people making memes about all these different disorders and everything, and it's like, right, it's so fun and exciting. I memes about this disorder, memes about depression, anxiety. It's like it's not meant to be fun and games. I mean, of course, you can laugh at yourself and this and that, but certainly, I think it's gone to more of an extreme length of that exploitation. Just as you said, I certainly see that there.
Which is really a distraction from like the roots of it, like what's caused such a mental disorder and everything. Mm-hmm. And I also just wanted to add that DID can show up in many different ways. Some people do go in and out of distinct alter personalities, and some people have different levels of distinction in their personalities, and these personalities being boxed off from one another. But also, you can have DID without necessarily that element. It's about how the mind compartmentalizes and the brain compartmentalizes and dissociates in that way, and it can affect your life in a multitude of ways.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, moving on to something that I have briefly talked about in a video when I was talking about if people have this condition, and this is MKULTRA, which, for anyone who is not aware, this is essentially a trauma-based mind control program. Another name that is often used is a monarch programming, or trauma-based mind control, whatever you wish to call it. So, can't say I am too familiar with this because this is something that I've not extensively studied. But Rachel, yes, please fill us in on what this is, because this is something that is very, very big.
Yes, it's very pertinent to not only is it done to so many victims, but it's pertinent to the whole world because we share this planet, and we're an interactive society, and we share a collective consciousness. But it's, as you said, if you want to just kind of define it with a sentence, it's trauma-based mind control. And so monarch programming is actually just one faction of MKUltra. So there's many different factions of MKUltra, many different, MKUltra is basically like the umbrella. And so monarch programming is specifically a sex slave programming, which is one of the most dominant programs being implemented in present day. And so it's, in general, a means to control people in the most extreme way. And it comes down to controlling an individual, but that is for the purpose of controlling the planet at large. And so it's carried out by a global organized crime syndicate comprised of many different factions. And you'll hear from everyone's different experiences and research and information that they gather, you'll hear kind of slight variations of who's really at the core, but you always find similarities. It's not just one organization or one group of anybody who's at the core, but they're working together, and then it trickles out into organizations all over the planet in all different kinds of, and all the different nooks and crannies of the planet, of society. And so it's a systematic form of mind control. It's very sophisticated, and it is scientific, but also spiritual at the same time. And they utilize the natural function of the mind to dissociate in order to do this. And so they're basically exploiting how the mind will naturally dissociate with trauma. So they'll intentionally traumatize the victim in order to make their consciousness shatter into many, many parts. And the trauma, the size of the trauma that they put on the victim is so big. Not only does the consciousness shatter, but it has very thick walls in between all the different parts. So you can think of it as like boxes or compartments in the mind. And so there's going to be thick walls in between each of them, so that all these different parts don't know about each other. And the core personality, the consciousness that carries you through your day-to-day life, it's not going to know about the alter personalities. And the alter personalities aren't going to know about the core personality, or the host, as many call it. So all you know is what's
we got some
in
stuttering
that reality.
There we go. There we go. We're back to normal. There was some stuttering there with what you were saying. It sounded very robotic. Technical issues, but yeah, it was just temporary.
You don't need to repeat anything.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're good now. Yeah. So this is something that many people really may not be aware of, and as you said, there's many. It goes pretty deep here, and there's a lot of things that are going on. A lot of people who can be involved in this sort of thing, and primarily then, I see it as like we're all under this sort of control as it is in some way. You have a lot of propaganda with a lot of the mainstream news media, and a lot of the things that they are backed by, and a lot of the scientific journals about a lot of health procedures. This is something that I have talked about quite passionately. With various different health procedures, and how it's all about limiting the freedom of a choice when it comes to any sort of medical intervention. So you have a lot of these ideas and beliefs that are being spread in multiple ways, because it's easier to control a group of people, and then just have like a one-size-fits-all approach via just the news media, and just say this is the answer, this is not the answer, black and white thinking, when we're all unique. We all have something different about us, that we should all be treated in a very unique way when it comes to any sort of thing going on. So you mentioned with MKUltra, it's about exploiting the mind's natural ability to dissociate. So how exactly is that done?
Well, it's through a variety of trauma, and largely in rituals as well. So satanic ritual abuse is very interlinked to MKUltra. It can depend on who the victim is. Every victim is going to be targeted for a specific reason. It's not just random. It's all by a very, very deep design that's been going on for centuries or thousands of years, really, of who's who and what can be exploited for our planetary controllers to try to maintain control. So there is MKUltra, which is it's pretty much targeting people for experimentation, and it can be kind of just more for experimentation purposes. And this can be psychic experimentation, medical, psychological, all sorts of experimentation. But then there's also many people who are experiencing this multi-generational. So they are targeted because of the bloodline that they belong to, and also who their soul is. So it's a very while it's scientific, it's also a very spiritual issue. So our souls are being analyzed before we incarnate. And MKUltra is multi-dimensional as well. It's going to be implemented in many different dimensions to your astral body, because your consciousness isn't just in this third dimension. And the people or the beings, you could say, who are doing this to people, they are aware of that too. They're aware of the multidimensionality, and they're working in all those realms for mind control as well. So it's interlinked very much with satanic ritual abuse for the people who belong to certain bloodlines of the people who consider themselves elites, the elite bloodlines. They will be experiencing MKUltra in utero. It starts in utero even. And so there's a lot of satanic spiritual abuse as well within MKUltra. And so the programming sessions are done with trauma, and it usually is done in a ritual type setting. There's plenty that's done in more of a just scientific setting. But the core programming sessions are done with extreme forms of physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and spiritual abuse. And when the psyche shatters, there is going to be a psychiatrist forming that altered personality, or those altered personalities. So there's a very specific design, and everything's interlinked and interwoven. So they're creating like a web system within a person, and so everything fits together. And so they're going to be molding the reality and the identity of that altered personality. And so obviously it's everything that they put into that reality and identity is something very negative. It can contribute to a person having all these underlying subconscious beliefs about themselves and reality that are false. And even if you're not in that altered personality at the moment, you carry all of this in you. So it's always underwriting in your subconscious mind, and it's coming out through your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Now, since you mentioned that this was such on a multi-dimensional scale, I would imagine then that there is no, it's on a global scale as well. It's the entire world. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter what time period that you lived in. It's all about, it's still happening regardless of where you live, how you lived, and things along those lines. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in every country. And there's no country that's really where it's dominant. I would say there's certain countries where you see it more, where it's puts more in the limelight, such as in America with Hollywood or the entertainment industry, but it's everywhere.
Yes, okay. So you had mentioned that a lot of this type of abuse that is done is essentially to create these different altered personality states, and in that regard, that is how it's very connected to dissociative identity disorder. Would you then put a separate category on people who are DID because of past trauma that they went through that are not connected to MKUltra, or would you say that most people who have this disorder are connected in some sort of way, or something that they may not know about their past that is connecting them to this program?
Well, I think it's very possible that someone can have DID through personal traumas and it's not connected to MKUltra or to being targeted. However, I would say there's also going to be a lot of times where people, even when they realize they have DID, they might not realize that their trauma was designed in a way, coming from the group of perpetrators who are the global organized crime syndicates. So it's possible that there is a connection there that they're not aware of. It might not be so extreme as someone who is born into this multi-generationally and all of their life is controlled, all of their consciousness is controlled. But there may be some connections there.
I got you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because we really don't know. A lot of people may not remember their past, and so when they have these issues, they're wondering, what happened, because certain alter personalities will have these memories and will have these ideas of what happened to them, and they will not be aware of that because of that wall that we discussed. And a lot of this, from my own experience, is certainly how I was, because I would always say when I was thinking about my past was that, I don't know what happened in my past, but I know it was really bad. And I was like, okay, well, how is that? And then that's when I went to start working on discovering my past and the issues that I went through. That's when a lot of things came back, and then a lot of these personality states made themselves really known to me, whereas before they were not known to me. So in that regard, that makes a lot of sense how they are connected. Now, what is the whole purpose then of having these alter personalities?
It's so that they can be called up at will of whoever is the perpetrator. I mean, there's a collection of perpetrators, and they're going to be implanted into all parts of your life, your daily life, and it's going to, if you're targeted, well, if you've experienced MKUltra, you will be targeted throughout your life. And
we're talking about family and friends and anyone else who's in your life, essentially. This is what it is. People just randomly that you may meet online, people that you may meet in person at a restaurant, at a grocery store. These are all people who are there specifically to monitor the person or to interact with them to gain some sort of information about them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And not only to gain information and monitor them, but also to activate those programs, those alters, in order to get the person to respond or behave in a certain way. And so essentially they want to use you as a puppet for their own agendas, for their controller's own agendas. And so everyone will be kind of given like a specific role or many roles in their life, and given many duties, you could say. And so having these alter personalities means that you can execute all of these duties without any onlookers or outsiders being aware of it. So it's designed so cleverly so that people don't know you have alters. So that it's so subtle when you are engaging with the public, and also just the actions that you take are so clear. The actions that have been programmed into you, the behavior, they're so clear that you're basically taking care of the job of the controllers. Like, for example, you're programmed to call in to report yourself, right? So that's just one example. And so in this way, you are just used as a puppet.
We got a good question here from Barney. I thought this program was halted in 1973. So what's your ideas on that, Rachel?
So that is very old ideas that is propagated by the controlled opposition. Controlled opposition is when you can't stop the dissemination of truth, so you're going to try to alter it in certain ways, control the trajectory, control the narrative of it. So just to continue on with that thought first, sorry. So if MKUltra, the awareness of it can't be stopped, they're going to try to control the narrative, such as when the documents were leaked several decades ago. When they leaked them, they said, okay, and now we've shut it down, we've shut the program down. But also another theory is that they leaked them on purpose in order to get ahead of any dissemination or any exposure of the truth, and still using the controlled narrative of it's shut down. So they leak the documents on purpose, then claim it's shut down. They claim that they've destroyed all the current documents, but that's just, it's a very, very old school narrative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's how a lot of things are. It is about this, just when information comes out like that, exposing certain government things that are going on, a lot of corruption going on, you have to also think, is that controlled in some way to bring about another certain outcome? Yeah, because a lot of
Yeah.
information comes out about a variety of different things, but you always have to be careful because you can't always believe everything, even the opposition, even something that is for. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So then, for everyone who may be watching this right now, what are some signs and symptoms of this MK Ultra mind control? How can some people be made aware if they are going through this if they have no idea?
And that's a really good question because I'll I'll say what's is like the number one sign that many people are sharing, but I would say this isn't even a very reliable sign. So you'll hear a lot of people say if you have missing time, you have chunks of your days, it can be recent, like current time, recent history, or maybe your childhood where you've had large chunks of time and awareness missing. Now, if this is your experience, then it could be a sign. It's just definitely a sign of dissociation. But it is definitely possible to have DID and to have experienced MK Ultra and to not have this symptom because your consciousness is so controlled and there can be cover stories that your mind is given or organically creates in order to account for missing time. So to expand beyond that kind of generic sign that isn't always a sign, I would say number one, if you have an all-encompassing, never-ending sense of chaos and confusion within yourself and your life. And the thing is, whatever you've grown up with, you're going to be so conditioned to it, you're going to normalize it. It's like a fish doesn't feel wet. And so you'll try to explain away or even blame yourself for why you're feeling all of this confusion and chaos. But that isn't natural. So just remember, like, all these, you have to trust your inner guidance and what you feel. And if something feels off, it's because it is. If something isn't clear, it's because it's not. It's not. And another sign would be a lot of just really improbable obstacles or cruel people in your life, or lots of bad situations where you feel like you're plagued with bad luck. So yes, law of attraction is a thing, and we might be attracting certain negative experiences to us because of the vibrations that we hold. But if it's just inundating you and it's so many obstacles that are just, they seem so improbable and never ending, that's your indication that you're being targeted.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because a lot of what you say is also a lot of my experience as well. Because I have from my childhood initially there was a lot of things that I would just, it was like I completely blocked everything out because of what I had went through. And then when the memories did come back, and at this point I do have a lot of those types of memories, there's still so many things that are blocked out to me. And it's kind of like, what happened during this time period? What happened during this time period? Who are these people? I have no memory of these people who may have have had a big part in my life according to family. It's like, well, if they had such a big part, why do I not remember them at all? And there's many other things as well. And it's interesting because from that childhood, a lot of the themes that happened there have carried into adulthood as well. A lot of those very, very same themes. And it's actually very interesting because I thought I had, worked through a lot of those types of themes of abandonment and a lot of other types of issues that I had. but it seems to have because I've grown and become, more stronger as a result. It seems to have shifted in a way to become more clever to have the same type of effect. And that's very interesting because it's still doing the same thing. It's just doing it in a different way that I was not aware of for a very, very long time. So it does make a lot of sense there. So
So
I
do you
guess
think it's changing strategies in order to match your personal growth?
yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And it is very interesting because, as I said, it was very, I always talk about this, a cycle of a life. Okay. So we have a challenge in our life and we go through this challenge and it comes back up. Like something happens that brings it back up and we can either learn from it or we can go through it again, go through it again. And I've had a lot of those moments where I've gone through it maybe a few times and then I become stronger and I overcome it. And there's another obstacle. But it also, a lot of them are like the same type of theme. So it's kind of like interconnected in that way. And it's kind of, as I said, there are certain things that just don't make any sense. There are things that also add up just too perfectly that it just is very odd. So yeah, it's really interesting. Um,
And it would be interesting to look at those themes and see, do they match kind of a global agenda? Do they match other kinds of, other, themes that targeted individuals might experience? Something that matches the social engineering or the planetary control that we're under.
yes.
So, in that way, it's more about planetary control being in your life rather than just your personal incarnation, what you've attracted. It's not so much personal, but it's involving something bigger than yourself.
Now we have something interesting here. Some comments about people talking that what we're discussing here is a conspiracy theory, essentially. And how is this not schizophrenia, and how is this not that, and everything. So yeah, this is a topic that is very conspiracy in nature. A lot of times you will hear a lot of people discrediting it for a multitude of reasons. And I've heard plenty of times that I talk about these conspiracy theory topics when a lot of times it's not conspiracy in nature. It's just people who don't really understand it and people who have never went through that or haven't done the type of research to really find those types of things. So what are your thoughts on regarding the people who say that this is a conspiracy theory and that it's just all made up in our head and it just doesn't exist?
The term conspiracy theory is, again, one of those controlled opposition terms that's propagated because it's become emotionally charged. And so let's take out the emotional charge of it. And let's just break down what the definition of a conspiracy theory is. So conspiracy is a real thing, right? It's a real behavior. It's a real action. It's a real crime. It exists. A theory is when you're theorizing about something. So what I'm speaking to is conspiracy crimes. My experience of being victimized with conspiratory crimes, with organized abuse. And so you have to be interested in learning how the planet works, just in general, not putting any labels or definitions on it. We have to be interested in how it works in order to see how things fit together, to see how things are connected, and also, like, just plainly, let's look at the state of the planet. We're in turmoil. We've been normalized to it. We've been told it's normal. It's not. It's common. Like pain, suffering, war, disease, starvation, just all this hatred and pain and suffering. It's common, but that's not normal. That is not natural to the human state. It's not part of the natural world. It's been engineered. So there's a big difference between common and normal. And so when you understand that, you can just understand this has been designed, this didn't just happen.
All right,
This is evolution.
we got the same people here saying you didn't answer the question and saying this sounds like paranoid schizophrenia.
So let's talk about paranoid schizophrenia then. Schizophrenia, if you go by basically the DSM, and I'm not a psychologist, but people talk about schizophrenia without even knowing what it is. So when we're talking about DID, that's a totally different disorder to schizophrenia. So
Oh
I
yeah,
would want
that's
I
one
would
of the biggest misconceptions there. I mean, many people who have dissociative identity disorder talking about online, it is a very different process here. It's a very different thing.
yeah, yeah.
And people need to discern those two because they can seem similar, but it is very different because we're talking more of the dissociation. We're not talking about the paranoia.
Right, right. And paranoia, if you want to define paranoia, it's having an unfounded fear.
Mhm.
So, I've expressed a lot of ideas and experiences, but I haven't actually expressed any fear. Fear is an emotion, but fear is a perfectly natural emotion that we'll all have. Um, if a targeted individual had fears about being targeted, many times the fears aren't unfounded. They have a real reason
Oh yeah.
for their fear. If you're a victim of crime, and you're being targeted with organized abuse, you have every reason for your fears. So in that sense, it wouldn't be paranoid.
Mhm.
And so I think this is a kind of topic that's just taken us way off the mark. And these kinds of things are MKUltra program trigger codes meant to activate a victim's programs.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense there. And you've talked about targets and targeted individuals. What exactly is a targeted individual? And we have talked about how some people can be targeted, such as like the bloodline. But it's also very interesting if people aren't part of that, why would they be targeted then? What would be the reason for being targeted if they're not part of this elite bloodline?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. But also, I wanted to go before we moved further away. We were talking about you'd asked about the signs and symptoms.
Oh, okay, there was still more there. Okay, good.
Yeah, and there's more that I'd really like to share with everyone, so that
Okay.
if people are watching, they can see if this applies to themselves. And so we were talking about I mentioned MKUltra trigger codes. So if people are using, this is another sign. If people are using like throughout your life, they're using the same phrases that don't quite make sense. They don't really fit into context. And codes can be more than just words and phrases. They can be hand gestures, colors, objects, symbols, situations, even emotions. But an easy sign to spot is if there's these repeated words or phrases that all kinds of people throughout your life use. And you'll notice that it always triggers a very strong emotional response in you if you are in the MKUltra programming. And so things like delusional, and you'll see this in cyber attacks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever, you have trolls.
Oh yeah,
And
I've seen that many times. Yeah.
so a troll they're not contributing anything intelligent to the discussion, and they're just there for personal attacking. And you'll see them online. You'll see them use the same phrases, and then it gets like just kind of put into all of society's mind, like delusional. That's a program trigger code. Crazy, schizophrenic. What else? Certain people will have those are like very blanketed trigger codes, but everyone will have ones that are designed for them. Like someone told me one of their codes was moron, or like stupid with some profanity attached to that. So if like so many people throughout your life are using these words, that's a sign. And so another sign would also be, so I'm just referring to, I got a list going. Right, so if you have an innate understanding of what torture is, that's a sign. And
And what do you
so
mean by that?
so when you hear the word torture and you automatically can conceptualize of it.
Oh,
This
okay.
actually isn't normal. So an MK Ultra person who is asleep to that aspect of their life, to the MK Ultra, they won't realize that's not normal because it's just so much part of them. But in actuality, if a person hasn't experienced torture, they if they haven't witnessed it firsthand or experienced it in themselves, they won't be able to conceptualize what it is. It's going to be very vague and abstract to them, and they won't even be able to really attach to what the emotions would be in torture or what would physically be taking place in torture. Yes, and so let's see. Another sign would be multiple memories where there's no explanation to an odd event or interaction, where these events and interactions are really out of context. So they might be just like little snippets of memories, and it seemed kind of odd, but maybe you were a child at the time, and so you just, as an adult, you just said, well, I just didn't understand because I was a kid. But I would say these memories need further exploration to really examine, like, what was off in that situation. Because even if you don't remember the whole thing, you might be able to identify more specifically why it felt off.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you can understand it's not just in your head or, not just the absentee mind of a child.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ideas and thoughts of things being off and not really making much sense and not adding up, but you don't remember what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And so things will kind of just, and if you don't remember like the outside, like the surrounding events of one particular memory you're attached to, that's your indication that maybe a trauma happened around there. So within trauma, your mind can also attach to details while leaving out the painful bits. And so that's why you might have like really clear memories as a child, but it's only very small, and there's kind of the surrounding events that are missing.
Mm-hmm.
Does
Oh
that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, and it's very interesting with me actually because it's just really really interesting. Like I've had plenty of bad moments, but I've also had plenty of positive moments, and I have more memory of the negative ones than I do the positive ones. And I've always wondered why that is. Why is it not that I remember a lot of the good things that happened? I don't. So I find that
Yeah.
fascinating.
Mm. And I think I have a couple more signs
Okay.
as well. So another one would be that you know how to stay calm and take control in very high stress or dangerous situations, and you leap into action without missing a beat. And so that's a sign that you've been in very dangerous situations where you were programmed to step up. So you're basically programmed for those dangerous situations, and you.
Ooh, hold up.
If I'm frozen.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
I think we just dropped a ton of frames there.
Okay.
Okay, I think it might have been on my end. I see a lot of issues here. I don't know what that was about. So, yes, please repeat like the last sentence that you said.
Well, I think, yeah, I saw it was frozen, but yeah, I was just saying that um, that would indicate that you've been programmed to respond to high dangerous or high stress situations, and so it is essentially your alters. Even if you're co-conscious with it in your day-to-day life, it is your alters taking over. Let me see if there's anything else. Any understanding twitches? Sorry, I'm just trying to read my own handwriting. Um, right, body memory is another thing. So this is also known as cell memory, where you have unexplainable pain throughout your body.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be a sign of, pain in your body could be a sign that you have something wrong with you. But if you're experiencing it very randomly and it might be also very quickly, like just these little like spurts of debilitating pain. That might be a body memory. So you're re-experiencing the pain that happened in a traumatic event. And so like I had this all my life and I thought it was normal. Again, whatever you grow up with, you think is normal. And it took me talking to someone else about it. I said, oh, you know those random pains you get? And they were like, no. It's like, okay, well, it took me years later still to see that it wasn't normal and to really understand. I think I probably read about, whenever I was reading about dissociation, I read about body memory and it started to make sense what I was experiencing. And then lastly, we were talking about monarch programming, which is the slave programming. And so one sign that this has happened to you is if you experience so much objectification in your life, especially sexual objectification, because we can objectify people in a multitude of ways, but especially sexual objectification. Even when you specifically try to avoid it, when you're trying to avoid it at all costs and you don't engage with this kind of sexual exploitation, you'll find that people all around you always objectify you in that way. Anyways, this is not normal. I thought, like growing up, I thought this was how society was because I was conditioned to it. Again, it's the conditioning. I thought that was truly how all society was, men and women. And, from healing, I started to understand that's not normal. And then I also started to attract healthier people. And I could see the reflection of what is normal. And another sign of monarch programming is if you've been conditioned, and all of these take a lot of deep self-reflection, but if you've been conditioned to believe you don't have a choice in how you engage in sex. So like if you have sex, when you have sex, how you have sex. If you feel that you do not have a choice and that it's up to somebody else, or you're automatically meant to fulfill somebody else's desires without even checking with yourself if this is what you want, that is not consensual. That it takes two parties for it to be consensual. And so that in itself is a sign. And just to continue on with that, if you have people who are taking advantage of this conditioning that they can identify in you, where they see you kind of belong to them as an object, if they take advantage of that, recognize that that is actually rape. They know that it's not consensual. There's no consent from you. They're aware of that, and that's rape, and that gets overlooked a lot. And so I think it's an important topic to talk about. But that's all the signs that I have noted down at this point.
That's great. I hope that's been able to help a lot of people. I see a lot of people here who have understand a lot of what you're saying there in regards to the signs and symptoms.
Sure.
Now, getting to the targeted individuals, we talked about the bloodline thing, and then what about why would other people be targeted outside of that?
Yeah, and there's a multitude of reasons, and I can't say that I know all of them because I'm not in the position where I'm targeting people, So I would say the people who know the most are the people who are doing the targeting, because there's going to be tons of shadow reasons. But it's people who are, even if you're not from the bloodlines, you might not even have experienced MKULTRA, but you can be targeted for other forms of organized abuse. If you match if your DNA and your psyche potential matches a framework that is identified as empowered. So it's actually, I forget what government's website it's on, but maybe if someone wants to do some research into this, targeted individuals are actually identified on certain governmental websites as empowered individuals.
I'm gonna write that. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, and if I remember where I learned that, and I can link you directly, I'll send that to you also. But
yeah, that's really interesting. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I heard it in a YouTube video. I remember that much, and I did go to the website and see it for myself. So if there's something about you where an empowered individual is someone who can affect society easily and naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So it means there's something about you that just has that effect on society. And if somebody is trying to control society, they don't want that
Mm-hmm.
influence. And so you will be targeted to try to shut that down. People are also targeted, psychics are targeted for a lot of kind of experimentation, because we are in a time of planetary spiritual awakening where people are going to be stepping into their intuitive power, understanding their eternal multidimensional essence. And so in an effort to control that awakening, psychics are currently heavily being targeted right now, for basically experimentation, so that they know how to control the masses in the spiritual awakening as well. Some other reasons that people might be targeted, if you have, and this is less common, there's usually something more about your person and who you are that predates this. But if you've kind of stepped into something where you didn't belong, so you saw something that you weren't supposed to, or you started disseminating truthful information, you may become targeted then. But the thing about targeting, it's a brainwashing program in itself. So there's usually a reason that predates that. You're going to be brainwashed for what the reason is. So you have to look deeper and try to zoom out your perspective and go and have a lot of retrospection into your whole life's history to see if your ancient or your early history, your early past is connected to your current situation. So those are just some other reasons why people might be targeted, but like I said, there could be a multitude.
Right. Okay. So we mentioned how there's a lot of people who could be, such as these perpetrators, the family and friends and things along those lines. People implanted in someone's life in that way. And just curious if you've ever had any sort of knowledge about if someone is a target and there's another target who is interacting with that person to gain information from. So it's the target on target as opposed to the perpetrator on the target. Is that very common as well?
It is very common. And the thing is, targets will use this to self-isolate. And we can talk a little bit about that and how that's not helpful. But to answer your question, yes. So people who aren't in full control of their alters, or who aren't integrated enough, they may be unwittingly spying on and monitoring and reporting back about other targets.
Mm-hmm.
Or they may not be aware that who is a perpetrator in their life. So they may be accidentally sharing sensitive information about a target to a perpetrator, not knowing. And there's also going to be people planted in your life who act as though they are an ally. Like maybe they'll admit to being a target and they'll act as though they're an ally, but really they are knowingly acting as a perpetrator, or they're just so deeply weaponized. So there's a difference if two targets come together for healing. There's a difference between that and two targets coming together, one saying they want healing, but really they are weaponized to just extract information and then later attack the other target. And so this is where you have to follow your heart. You have to be in touch with your heart. You have to be connecting to your heart and start to live your life from that place. It's a very profound spiritual experience when you connect to your hearts. It sounds cliche if you aren't practiced in it, and it might sound simplistic. It is, and that's the beauty of the divine. Our real power is simple. It's accessible to everyone, but your heart's the totality of your soul. And so, we can get into isolating ourselves because we're so afraid of other people,
Mm-hmm.
extracting information or hurting us.
That's where
But
that's where some of the paranoid, well, people will think it's paranoid that you don't want to interact with anyone because you feel as though they're going to do something to you or hurt you. And
mhm.
this is something that I've experienced in my life. I am far beyond that at this point. I interact with a lot of different people, but um, yeah, that is certainly where some of this confusion that people have said previously in the chat stems from.
Gotcha. Yeah. And like I said, it's a real founded fear. So it's not paranoia,
Yeah.
but you can overcome you can overcome the fear so that you are in your power. So it doesn't have to be something that you're fearful of. Because if you are living by your heart and you then attract other people who are living by their hearts, and you can decipher, you can discern who is living by their heart. So you choose who you interact with and in what way. So you might not, it's good boundaries to practice also, that you don't just give yourself over to another person, but you just follow your intuition for how to engage with others for heart purposes.
Hmm.
I think we're frozen again.
It's fun on my end.
Okay. It was just a small glitch then. And so all of this, when we're living by our soul, connected to our higher divinity, our higher purpose, it overrides any negative consequences that anyone might be trying to implement on you. Healing, when heart-centered people come together for healing, healing happens. It's more powerful than anybody's control over you.
Very, very good. That's definitely a good thing there to heal and uncover what genuine people are in your life. And that's actually a good place to move into the final main topic here, which is healing. How you can uncover a lot of this and how you can heal. So, you talked earlier about the spiritual awakening. Was that your way of figuring out that a lot of this happened to you through that spiritual awakening?
Well, it was a catalyst for me to start self-healing, but I had started to put some pieces together before, some pieces of self-healing before, but it was really the catalyst. So I was actually, for my spiritual awakening, I was almost suicidal, but I was also so physically ill, I couldn't actually end my life. And so what happened was, when my illness lifted, I woke from sleep one day, and that's my spiritual awakening. I rebounded from the darkness. It's like the rubber band effect. You stretch back a rubber band into the darkness so far it reaches its limits. When you let it go, it shoots into the light in an instant. So I was suicidal right before my first spontaneous spiritual awakening. And so whenever I had this new lightness in my mind, I decided, well, I was just about ready to kill myself. So how about, I have all this new like insights and energy. How about I just go full force for life, like finding fulfillment and what personally fulfills my soul, because I've never done that before. So I'm going to abandon everything else because, otherwise I was ready to die. So might as well just abandon it all now and go for what I want. And I did that like just on an extreme scale. And it was still systematic though. Like I had to shed layers of ego that gave me limitations for it. But I started to explore my subconscious mind. And so a big part of healing is developing your emotional literacy, understanding what your emotions are, why they're there, learning how to feel them fully. And then you can use that for inner child work too. So that was a hallmark of my healing, emotion-based inner child journey, which also goes hand in hand with soul retrieval. And so that's kind of the foundation. But if you connect to your hearts daily, it will guide you for all the healing that you need, because everyone's path is going to be different.
That's very, very true. If you're doing something you're passionate about, if you follow your dreams, follow your heart, and it really opens up a lot of the world and really opens up a lot of healing potentials you can have. That's not to say that you're going to be immune from the hard times and the bad times and the negative thoughts that may come up, but it's all about just doing what you really love and overcoming that. And it's something that I've been doing for a while now, and it can be an obstacle for many due to financial reasons. I mean, if someone loves being an artist and they love to draw, but they just can't make it as an artist, they can't make that money, then they have to do something that they may not like in order to financially sustain themselves. So it can be a bit conflicting there as well, because I always say do what you love, go for what you love, but that's not always how it's going to work out for many people, primarily due to the monetary system that governs our life. So
Yeah, it's not always a straightforward path to your joy and to your
yeah.
dream. And specifically, what I was talking about with listening to your heart is more than following your heart's desires and passions, but your heart organ will give you very specific guidance for everything that you need. So I like to do just simple heart meditations where I'm placing my awareness in my heart, putting my consciousness into my heart, listening to my heartbeats, and then communicating with it, asking my heart, like the organ itself, for guidance or what it needs, etc. You can get specific. What kind of healing do you need right now? And there's no limits to what your heart organ itself, what it will tell you. And so, like you were saying, you can have the hardships, following your calling and your joy. It's not always a straight path, and you're going to face those hardships. But your heart will give you the guidance that you need to navigate it all. And then there's a beautiful expansion through all those hardships.
That's very, very true. So, if you had to, in maybe a few sentences, what advice would you have for others who may be going through this, who may be thinking that they have some sort of past trauma that they're not aware of, or alter personalities, or whatever else that we talked about today? What would be your advice for those people?
Well, number one, I would say to first remember who you are as a multidimensional and eternal being. You are beyond this body. You are beyond this life. Your power is infinite and unlimited, and there is a reason why you're here. There is a reason why you experienced what you did, and that's not to justify it. It's not to invalidate the pain that you're in, or to justify bad things happening to you or abuse. But try to connect. If you connect to your heart, it's the gateway to connecting to your soul, and then you can see things from an expanded point of view and integrate that into your human perspective. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people feel fear or overwhelm or hopelessness in having gone through something like this, or thinking that they might have. They might have so much fear in trying to explore it and trying to face it and understand if they've really have experienced MKUltra. But just remember who you are as a soul, because it's so much bigger, and your power is infinite. And we can move beyond the whole clinical mindsets of mental disorder, or what's happening on the ground in Earth. And remember, there's also a lot happening beyond Earth as well. And I did take a couple notes. Let me see if there's anything else I want to make sure to share with anyone.
Yeah, we need to do the closing thoughts. And for anyone who has any questions for Rachel and I, please ask them now while she's doing the closing thoughts here, and then we will answer any questions that you may have, as long as it's not something that we've already answered, because there's some people here just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, and if you're going to keep doing that, you're just going to ignore you. So go ahead, Rachel.
And lastly, advice, I would say to try to drop all things that have conditioned into you from the outside world, and just journey inwards. And I'll say it again, through the heart. You'll find so much wisdom there, and everything that you've been conditioned to, beliefs about yourself, about how to heal, about what reality is, the purpose to life, all of that will fall away, and you'll discover something entirely unique to yourself, and it's really beautiful to uncover. And so, I hope that is helpful to other people.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very, very helpful. So I want to thank you so much. So let's see what kind of questions that we have here. Um, Someone asks here, have you ever had any hallucinations?
I have I have not in my conscious awareness. So LSD is something, LSD produces
Hmm.
hallucination. So LSD is a drug that is used in programming sessions. So in the formation of alters, in that process, which I don't have full memory of, at this point in my healing, um, I most likely did experience some form of hallucinations. But in my day-to-day life, no, I don't experience hallucinations.
Yeah, and that's one of the misconceptions about schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder as well that I hear a lot. Schizophrenia is about psychosis. It's about having those hallucinations that the mind can create.
Yeah.
Whereas dissociative identity disorder, I mean, it's possible that you may have some, but that's not one of the symptoms of it. That's not one of the traits of the disorder, and that's where some people get a bit confused.
Correct.
Okay, we have another one here. When did you first realize you had DID?
So I did a year of intense self-healing. I guess I didn't clarify this part actually. So I had my first spontaneous spiritual awakening that I described as like that rubber band effect from the dark to the light. And that led me on so much self-healing. It was a second spiritual awakening that I simultaneously awoke to the MKULTRA programming. So in essence, I woke up one day and I remembered that it had happened to me. I remembered the context of it and everything. But that came about from that whole year of self-healing I was doing. I was plugging in the puzzle pieces all along the way. So that's kind of how I conceptualize of it. As I integrated my subconscious mind, it was plugging in puzzle pieces until one day I plugged in the final piece that was needed in order to see the bigger picture. Just like if you were doing a jigsaw puzzle, right? But my awareness that I had DID did come before my awareness of MKUltra. So I don't even know how I was led to this book. I don't remember, but this woman was talking about DID, and her experience was nothing of MKUltra that she described. But it made so much sense. It finally explained so much that I couldn't explain myself. The kinds of struggles I was dealing with, the way my mind compartmentalized and functioned. And I did have other intuitive signs. I was very connected to my intuition, to the spirit realm, to my spirit guides. And so I would have signs about having multiple personalities, because at that time, that's how severe my DID was, going in and out of multiple personalities without my awareness of it. And so that was probably in the autumn or the wintertime of 2014,
Hmm.
of the wintertime following my spiritual awakening. And then the next spring, I woke to MKUltra. I'm trying to see if there's anything more I can share about how I realized I had DID. I mean, I did eventually visit a therapist, after I had already validated everything for myself, who gave me a formal diagnosis of DID. Unfortunately, that therapist was a perpetrator as well, because like we were saying, I was still under the MKUltra programming at the time, not being
Yeah.
aware of it. And, as we were saying, you will be so heavily targeted so that all elements of your life are controlled.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, therapists are used as what's called a handler,
Hmm.
someone who's controlling the alter system, who's controlling the person. So I had a formal diagnosis there. So it's that diagnosis in many ways was legitimate, but a lot of things that happened with that therapist weren't legitimate. Such as they didn't really help me. So that's what I mean by it wasn't legitimate. They offered me like no kinds of help or support. Um, and yeah, it was really about connecting inwards, and like I said, journeying through the soul. I started to get signs about multiple personalities. Then I read that book and it kind of plugged in all the pieces.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to answer that question personally, as well, um, that was actually pretty far up now. We got a lot more things coming in. We won't be able to get to them all. But there's also a lot of conversations. But for me, when I first realized these alter personality states, it was probably around 2012, maybe a little bit before. And I've heard several moments prior to that my family said, it's like you're different people. It's like you're acting differently, and they could identify them. Like there was like the one that was like this playful little girl one, the very very mean and angry, and one, and just all these other different things that I never really thought about. I never really gave any attention to because it wasn't in my awareness. And then there were also memories that I had from the past when uh, I was very, very shy as a kid. I didn't really, you know, interact much with people I didn't know and kids I didn't know. It was very, very hard for me to do that. And I remember several times when I was at a birthday party for a one of my friends, and it was just very strange. But I just started just playing with a lot of the toys there and just acting very different. And I have memory of that. I'm like, why did I behave so different during those moments when I was very shy? It was like that was all taken out, and I was acting like a different person there. So I really don't know what that was about, but that was very similar to the same exact type of personality that I identified when I was older and what my family had seen when I was older. So um, it was about the same there. So yes, that is
Discovered
mine.
that in 2012.
I want to say it was 2012. Yeah, it may have been a little bit before. Like I think my family maybe started noticing it maybe 2010. If not, it could have been prior. I don't know, but I really started to hear it more past 2010 is when my family really started to talk more about that, and it was primarily 2012 is I think the year when it just really started to come out. So.
So you had that external reflection from family showing you the signs, and then that inspired you to journey inwards to see, what are they actually talking about,
Yeah,
and what's to this
yeah. I
actually.
journeyed inward and I discovered a lot of these different personality states that I had, and I was able to identify them. And it wasn't something that was, it honestly wasn't very hard to do because they were already there. I just wasn't conscious of them. I wasn't thinking of them before. But then I was like, okay, wrote them all down, wrote, who they are, what their purpose is, and everything. And it's that was my awareness there.
Hmm.
Um, so we had another question. This was actually a while back now. Um, are you guys fully integrated? And for people who don't know what that means, with dissociative identity disorder, the natural way the body and mind heals is through integration, which is essentially I've interviewed someone else about this topic as well. If you want more insight into that, but it's about these alter personalities merging into core consciousness to have all the memories and ideas shared amongst the one core personality. So for me, I would say for the most part, yes. That's not to say that maybe there are some other things that I'm not aware of, um, but that's just me. So what about you, Rachel?
So with MK Ultra, it can be a little bit different in like the process of integration because it is so complex and multi-layered.
Hmm.
Everyone's awakening and healing will take a different path. And so I learned this from talking to dozens of other survivors and seeing them in different parts of their journey, and like even though like we may have all done a lot of healing, it'll just show up differently for us. And so for me, I'm integrated in the sense that I no longer go in and out of of complete compartmentalized alters without my
Yes.
awareness of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would
Like,
agree with that as well. Yeah.
okay, yeah, because there's, that's the extreme form, but I disintegrated that dissociative amnesia. And so I do still have alters that affect me more subconsciously, but I'm co-conscious with them,
Hmm.
which is to say I'm not losing awareness. It's something that's more subtle, more subconscious. And but I've integrated a lot, and it's also different because if you live, I aim to live as my heart, embodying my heart, and in that way I'm an integrated person. But it's the awareness, mostly the awareness my alters carry, which I'm still integrating, because the memories are so traumatic and so starkly different from what I was conditioned to believe my life was. There can be a lot of cognitive dissonance or just a
I
shock
was
to
just
this.
thinking that. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, it can be like shocking to the system. So it takes. I don't know how long it will take me, but so far it's taken a few years
Mm-hmm.
to integrate the awareness and the memories of those alters. But as far as their personalities, I would say I'm integrated maybe 80%, but self-awareness is a tricky thing. You don't know what you don't know, so that's just a guess.
Yeah, yeah, and I was totally thinking the same thing about the cognitive dissonance, because this is something that has been it's a very strong idea in my mind, just very presently, and it's something that I will be talking about in an upcoming stream that I'll be doing. Hint, hint for everyone who's watching. It'll be next Friday. Um, so yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and that's also a part of the programming, because it's like for example, if someone has a parent who is very loving, or even just a partner, for example, who's very loving and kind, and then the next minute they're abusing them, and they're beating them, and they're neglecting them. It's like the mind doesn't know how to comprehend someone who loves you and someone who hates you at the same time. And that's part of the programming as well, to create
Yeah.
that split in your mind, to create that idea that it's two opposite ends. And I've had people in my life that have created this, absolutely, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's like you were saying, you have those two opposite ends, and so you have to like choose what side you wants to believe, and whatever evidence you have for the opposite side, you'll end up blaming yourself for it. So a lot of times to cope, we'll believe that person really is loving, and all that hateful stuff, all the abuse that came from them, well, that's because there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like, we live in a narcissistic society, um, where it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, and people aren't even aware of it because it's society, we're so normalized to narcissism that we don't understand it creates a certain dynamic, within a person who's entangled with a narcissist, and between the narcissist and their victim or their target, cognitive dissonance being one of them.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I think this was a great topic of discussion. I want to thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on here. You can check out her YouTube channel and her Facebook page. Both are linked in the description of the video. So, yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you to Autumn. Can I also add, that I have a support group for MKULTRA survivors?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So we have an online support group, and so you can contact me privately to inquire about that. And I also have an in-person support group where I am in Totnes, England. So just if anyone wants to connect in a community. But yes, and thank you, Autumn, for having me. And this was a great discussion, and I hope it's helped the audience.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been very, very helpful. So you all take care, and I will see you all again next Friday. I'll be doing another live stream this Friday on YouTube. If you're a YouTube follower, then you will there'll be a new video posted that's already gone out everywhere else this Friday. So I'll see you again soon. So you all take care. Bye-bye.